Hello everyone, I am Atiqur Rahman. I teach at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today we are going to learn about hyperspectral remote sensing. Hyperspectral remote sensing is a technique which is advanced technique of remote sensing for acquiring another type of data. We all know that there are 4 or 5 types of remote sensing satellite data. One is called optical remote sensing, second is called thermal remote sensing, another is called hyperspectral remote sensing, another is called microwave remote sensing, or in other words all these are called hyperspectral data, microwave data, thermal data or optical data. But in today's module, specifically in today's discussion in half an hour or so, we are going to understand hyperspectral remote sensing satellite data, the basic characteristics of the data and their uses and the application in the end. Now, as the name says hyperspectral, it uses there are 2 words, one is hyper and second is spectral. Hyper means too many, spectral means spectral regions or the bands. In the spectral region there are different bands, that is very fine, narrow, discrete bands. If I let you understand in a way that in optical remote sensing, in the visible region 0.4 micrometer to 0.7 micrometer, there are only 3 bands, blue, green and red. But what do we have in hyperspectral remote sensing, that within this region from 0.4 to 0.5 we have n number of discrete fine narrow bands, and in hyperspectral remote sensing data we have spectral bands of no less than 200 bands. So, imagine in very thin narrow region of electromagnetic spectrum we have 200 bands. So, why do we do that? Now, the question is why we need to have this much of spectral bands. The simple answer if I say is that if we want to differentiate, if we want to distinguish, if we want to separate it out in a very detailed and finer way, for that we need to have finer spectral bandwidth. Say for example, if I give you an example in a common word, that if you want to measure any weight, any object of different weight, so you can say 1 kilogram, 2 kilogram, 3 kilogram, like that. But if you say that 1 kg 100 gram, 1 kg 5 gram, 1 kg 50 gram or something like that, or if we say 10 centimeter, 5 centimeter, 2 centimeter, if I say 10.1, 5.1, 2.1, so that makes better detail, better accuracy. If I say 10.112, 5.112, so that gives you better detail, better understanding. So, therefore, if we use hyperspectral remote sensing data, that means we are trying to differentiate, separate out even the finer, very clear details, and especially the people from geology, where they want to understand, they want to separate out, they want to understand, they want to analyze different rocks, different minerals, where little bit of change in calcium, magnesium changes the nature of the name of the rock, nature of the rock and so and so. Therefore, the people in the geology and other discipline, they want to use and they have to use, or they are using widely the hyperspectral data, especially in the agricultural sciences and the geography people. What they are doing, they are also using optical instead of optical, they are using hyperspectral data, where if you want to separate one type of tree to another type of, one type of grass to another type of grass. So, even the very finer details of grasses and other vegetation or other man-made or natural features, if you want to separate it out, if you want to understand, if you want to quantify, then you need to understand, and for that you have to have a data from the hyperspectral remote sensing. So, friends, let us see different figures and diagrams, and for that we can go to the classroom for better understanding. There I can understand you, I can explain you in much detail, because by diagrams you can understand better rather than I keep on speaking and speaking and you do not see the picture. So, I keep on speaking and I will explain the diagrams and figures, that will give you more clear understanding. Hyperspectral remote sensing. As I said that there are different types of remote sensing, and this particular technology, this particular science of hyperspectral remote sensing is an advanced technology. So, if you see figure 1, that shows the 3D-dimensional cube of a hyperspectral remote sensing data. So, I will show you some of the maps, some of the diagrams that gives you a better understanding and clear-cut understanding about the hyperspectral remote sensing technique, science and data, and lastly the application. Now, figure 2 shows that the spectral region which is being used for acquiring the hyperspectral data. Now, you see the visible region, infrared region, micro region. These regions are further sliced into fine, discrete, narrow bands, and therefore we call it hyperspectral data. Such a fine that within 1 micrometer you can slice, and the sensor are being sliced into 10 or to 20 regions, so that the fine, discrete, different objects, even minute details, little bit change in mica, little bit change in silicate can be identified, can be interpreted, and then that can be assessed, that can be looked into. Now, if we see the figure 4, what we have, which shows the concept of hyperspectral imagery. If you see, there are 3 objects, one is soil, vegetation and water. What we have, if you see the brick like thin slice, one above the another, this is a portion of a small particular surface of the earth, and that has been shown here. So, that shows in a very fine changes. If you see the water, the graph of water, what we have is this little bit undulation that shows that this at particular point the reflectance is more. If you go right, the reflectance is little less, and further this is smooth. That shows that from this point onwards the surface is smooth. So, even this very small changes in the water quality and type of water that can be detected, that can be mapped, which cannot be done by using optical data. Now, figure 4 shows, if you see the middle figure, where the spectral reflectance curve of vegetation is shown. What we have, in a very short distance you will find lot of several peaks, ups and downs. That again clearly shows, if you see from middle to right, that clearly shows that there is change in variation in vegetation type. It could be forest type, it could be tree type, it could be cropped, it could be commercial crop, it could be food grain crop, any crop. So, this cannot be done, this cannot be assessed, this cannot be mapped by using other satellite data. And if you see the top graph, that is soil graph, again you see there is a very short distance, lot of variation, lot of changes that we observe. So, this is the beauty of hyperspectral imagery or hyperspectral satellite data uses. Now, friends, if we see figure 5, that shows representative spectral reflectance curve for several common earth surface material over visible light to reflected infrared region. This I have already shown you, that the same almost same figure, that if we see from region 0.4 to 1.0, that is the common spectral reflectance curve. But if you go beyond, that is a further how it behaves in the region, say for example 1.6 to 1.8 and 2 to 2.4 micrometer. So, that further gives you a better understanding of the satellite data that is being sensed in a different region. If we see next figure, that is figure 6, what it shows, that is a very fine example of what you call of geological applications. As I said before, that hyperspectral data is widely used in geological studies, mineral separation, mineral identification, rock type identification. And if you see the reflectance spectra of some of the representative minerals, there are a couple of minerals that has been taken as an example. One is hematite, second is monotoralite, and third is kyanite, then we have the calcite, and then we have the orthoclase, feldspar. Now, if we see the different region and the reflectance, the wavelength region has been plotted on the x axis, and reflectance proportion of the sun's energy that is reflected, that is in the percentage on the y axis. So, what we have, you see different peaks, ups and downs. So, if you see the hematite and caronite, it can be separated easily. But if we separate out feldspar with what you call calcite, that cannot be done using the visible region and other region. But once you slice it, what we see that there is finer details, finer separability can be mapped and detected in the form of reflectance curve that we see in the figure 6, especially the right portion of the figure 6. So my summation is that if you want to differentiate, separate out, identify different minerals, for that you have to have data from hyperspectral, which sends in larger several hundred multispectral bands. Now if we see figure 7, another very fine example of hyperspectral data, that is reflectance spectra of different types of green vegetation compared to a spectral curve of dry yellowed leaf. What we have, if you see the dry yellow leaved, which has a different reflectance on the left side of this in the near infrared region, then we have the grasses, then we have the walnut tree canopy, then fir tree. So you see the fir tree and walnut, if you go on the 1.4 micrometer of infrared region, what we have, there is very clear cut differentiation. But if you go at the 1.4 micrometer, the separability is less. But the moment you go right of this 1.4, say in the region 1.6 to 1.8, what we have, then again we have the separability between these dry yellow grass and grasses and the fir tree and walnut tree canopy and all. So therefore this again clearly shows that the fair application of different types of vegetation which are there in a particular part of the surface of the earth, which is again, I reiterate that it has been possible by using the hyperspectral data. That cannot be done, that cannot be separated by using the optical satellite data. So therefore today I said that this is widely being used by the agriculture people, forestry people, and so and so. Now if we see another application of hyperspectral data, if you see the figure 8, that gives you very clear understanding, very interesting picture, that on the left side of this there is a snapshot of a computer screen where you see different types of leaves. One tree is dark in color, maybe green, one is whitish, or some is yellowish and something. So what you see, there are different color and different shape and size of leaves. One is called fake leaf pepper, the fake leaf shop, then real leaf, then dead leaf, then plastic leaf. So if you put all these leaves, and if you assume that these leaves are in reality in an open areas, so how they behave with the sun's energy. So what we see on the top of this, there is a reflectance of the sun's reflectance, then the colored paper, fresh leaf and all. So what we see, there is a wide variation in these reflective behavior. So therefore based on the reflective behavior and the leaf type, that separates one tree with another tree. That is another very important use of hyperspectral data that we can compare with the natural and artificial leaves and so on. So now if you see figure 9, that shows that if you are in urban area, as I said that this is also being used in urban areas, what we have. In urban areas we have somewhere we have the asphalt road, somewhere with the concrete road, then somewhere we have the concrete roof surfaces, somewhere with the dark roof surfaces, somewhere with the granite surfaces. So if you want to separate it out, what kind of rooftop is there, what kind of bare surfaces are there, what kind of material that is being used. So for that again you have to take the hyperspectral data, and for that figure 9, as I said before, is clearly shows that basalt does not respond very strongly in all the wavelength region, starting 0.4 to 2.4. If we talk about fall rooftop, it behaves strongly in the visible region, then it goes down. Then we have the concrete surfaces which behave strongly in all the wavelength region. If we have the granite rooftop, that is strongly behave in near infrared and middle infrared. So therefore we can assess the surface material that is being used in urban areas by using hyperspectral data, which also in return can assess the urban environment, what kind of urban environment, what is the temperature, what is the urban climatic condition that is there. That is another very important application of hyperspectral data. Now, if you see the figure 10, what we have, that we have seen almost similar thing, that that we do have a spectral library. So, figure 10 clearly shows that we have the spectral library, that if we have a concrete surfaces, if you have the basalt surfaces, if you have the asphalt surfaces, in anywhere in the in India or any parts of the world, if the same material is there, so it will behave similarly. So, we do have the spectral library. If we can match this spectral library on the hyperspectral satellite data, what we can do is we can clearly say what is a particular feature on that particular part of surface of the earth, and we do not necessarily go to identifying from the satellite images, but we go for a spectral library, match the spectral library with this data what we have available in the particular part, and then can do the analysis. Now, if you see the figure 11, what we have, that is reference spectrum of mineral of gypsum. What we have, that shows ki what kind of reflectance is there in a particular wavelength region for a gypsum. Say, if you take the gypsum and if you see the wavelength region for A, B and C, A is with several absorption feature, B curve shows the continuous for a spectrum, and C is the spectrum after removal of the continuum. So, what we have, that is we try to match whether this gypsum matches with the signature A, it matches with the B or C. That is the spectral matching method. We match with the spectral library and we can identify what kind of this mineral is that, which is gypsum, which is calcium, which is calcite, what is all. Now, we have the spectral and mixing. What we have, since we are using n number of bands, so there is a chances that it may mix, this feature may mix. So, for that we have the linear unmixing technique, and for that what we have, if you see the figure 12, where we have the scene on the left side is AVIRIS scene, that is visible infrared region, then right side we have the soil fraction, then we have the vegetation fraction, and then we have the water fraction. So, by using the linear unmixing we can separate out different objects differently. Now, if we see the figure 13, what we have, if we see the wavelength region on the x axis, on the y axis we have the grasses, we have the paint, we have the fabrics, we have the trees, that the profile clearly shows different objects that can be separated out by using hyperspectral data. And lastly, or the second last, we have the figure 15, where we have already talked about, it has been shown that spectra 2 to 16 micrometer, which represent most important class of rock formation mineral, that is aquatite, quartz, then epizote, then biolite and all. So, that clearly shows that by using satellite data, the reflectance curve, that emissivity that is shown on the y axis of figure 14, that shows that if these can be separated very easily. And the last, if we talk about this figure 15 of this hyperspectral remote sensing module, if we take a set of stones and that is scanned, what we see that from region point 7.7 micrometer to 12.4 micrometer, quartz and feldspars can be easily separated and identified. That you see on the image on the left side of this figure 15, we have the sample rocks and minerals, and the right side we have the reflectance curve. So, to give a better understanding in a tabular form, I have categorized the different characteristics of hyperspectral sensors, that is airborne or satellite based, which is clearly shown in table 1. Now, table 1, on the right side we have the spectral age, then the left of it with the number of bands, then the manufacturing, that is not so important, then left side we have the type of sensor. The one type of sensor that we call is FTHSI on Mighty Sat 2, manufacturer is Air Force Research Lab. Second is Hyperion, which is widely used in today's context. Manufacturer is NASA. All these two sensors, have a spectral bands is of 256 for FTS HSI and Hyperion, which has a spectral bands of 220. Imagine. And the best part is that if you see the spectral region of Hyperion data, it is spectral range is 0.4 to 2.5 micrometer. So narrow band, but number of band is 220. So if we see similarly hyperspectral sensor on the aircraft, not only satellite, that is not so commonly used because once we have the Hyperion data, so we are not using that much of. One is called Airborne Visible Infrared Imaging Spectrometer. Again, it is a NASA product of US, which has a spectral bands of 224, and the spectral range is again 0.4 to 2.5. Similarly, another that is sensor is HIDICE, that is Hyperspectral Digital Image Collection Experimental. It is a naval research product which has spectral bands of 210 and region is same. And if you see at the bottom of this table, the last, that is the Airborne Imaging Spectroradiometer, and it has a spectral region from 0.43 to 1, further very narrow, and then the number of band is up to 288. One I would like to mention more is the second last row of the table 1 is DIAS, Digital Airborne Imaging Spectrometer, that is again US product, where visible region, near infrared region and short wave infrared region is being used. And the beauty is that it also sense in the thermal infrared region. So out of so much of 100 of bands, what we have, visible near infrared is 76 in the bracket that you can see in the table, in short wave infrared region 64, short wave infrared region 2 64, and mid infrared region 1, and thermal infrared region 6. So these are the different bands which are being sensed in different spectral region. So friends, let us summarize today's chapter. The chapter which was discussed, we were discussing was on hyperspectral remote sensing. The hyperspectral remote sensing, what we have seen that is a sensing, is an advanced sensing about capturing the earth surface feature in different spectral region. And what we have seen that in the hyperspectral remote sensing, there are more than 200 bands, 250 bands, 300 bands, and more than 400 bands. So what we have, the beauty is that today many of the people are using hyperspectral data instead of optical data. It is used as that of the same what we used to do for the optical remote sensing. So the beauty what I was mentioning is that it is to differentiate, separate, identify the fine details, even the very fine details that can be captured. So in today's context, when we are mapping the resources, especially the natural resources, the mineral resources, which is the wealth of the nation. So in order to understand even the finer details, we have to have the hyperspectral data, which are being used in number of applications for crop diversification, crop inventory, crop acreage estimation, forest type, biodiversity, and many more things, habitat suitability, and so and so. Even the hyperspectral data is being used for, you say, land use, land cover mapping, green cover mapping, and so and so. So I do hope that you could have got a very clear cut understanding and in depth and general knowledge about the use and the science of the hyperspectral remote sensing data which is being used in today's context. So I wish you all good luck. Thank you very much for your kind attention and patience.